Ethan loved his Labrador, Bailey, more than anything. Bailey had been his best friend for 5 years, always by his side, always full of energy. Every morning, Bailey would jump onto Ethan's bed, wagging his tail like crazy, licking his face until Ethan finally got up. Their days were filled with long walks, fetch games, and lazy evenings on the couch. But then, something strange happened. One evening, after a long day at work, Ethan sat on the couch with his laptop. Bailey, who usually curled up by his feet, did something different. He sniffed Ethan's side, right below his ribs. At first, Ethan laughed. "What's up, buddy? You smell my dinner," he joked, scratching Bailey's ears. But Bailey didn't stop. He kept sniffing, pushing his nose against Ethan's side, then pulling back and sniffing again. His ears were up, his eyes focused. He even pawed at Ethan gently, as if trying to tell him something. "All right, that's enough," Ethan chuckled, moving Bailey away. But his dog wouldn't quit. The sniffing continued the next day, and the next. Every time Ethan sat down, Bailey was there, sniffing the same spot over and over again. At first, Ethan found it annoying. "Bailey, stop. What's with you lately?" He sighed. He tried distracting Bailey with his favorite toy, but it didn't work. He tried giving him treats, but Bailey ignored them. That was unusual. Bailey never ignored treats. That night, as Ethan lay in bed, Bailey jumped up beside him. Normally, Bailey would settle near his feet, but this time, he did something different. He pressed his nose right against Ethan's ribs again. He let out a soft whine, looking up at Ethan with concerned eyes. "Bailey, what is it?" Ethan whispered. He felt a small chill run down his spine. Something about the way Bailey was acting made him feel uneasy. A few days later, the sniffing turned into nudging. Whenever Ethan sat down, Bailey would push his nose against the same spot on Ethan's ribs, harder this time. He even pawed at him, his nails lightly scratching through Ethan's shirt. "Okay, this is getting weird," Ethan muttered to himself. He decided to check the area in the mirror. Pulling up his shirt, he pressed his fingers along his side. Nothing hurt. Nothing looked strange. Maybe Bailey was just being silly. But then something happened that made Ethan's heart race. One evening, while watching TV, Bailey suddenly jumped up onto the couch and let out a loud bark. He turned to Ethan and started sniffing and pawing frantically at the same spot on his ribs. This time, he didn't stop when Ethan pushed him away. His barks grew louder, more urgent. His body was tense, as if he was trying to tell Ethan something important. Ethan's chest tightened with a strange feeling, one he couldn't explain. "Bailey, what's wrong?" he whispered. His Labrador stared back at him, his eyes filled with something Ethan had never seen before. Was it fear? Desperation? Ethan swallowed hard. He didn't believe in weird superstitions. He didn't believe in signs, but something about Bailey's behavior wouldn't leave his mind. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe Bailey was just being weird. But what if he wasn't? That night, as he lay in bed, Ethan found himself unable to sleep. Bailey curled up beside him, his nose still resting against Ethan's ribs. For the first time since this started, Ethan felt a flicker of fear. Maybe Bailey was trying to warn him about something, and maybe he should listen. Ethan couldn't stop thinking about Bailey's strange behavior. It had been weeks now, and Bailey still wouldn't leave him alone. No matter where Ethan sat, his dog was right there, sniffing the same spot on his ribs. One morning, while getting ready for work, Ethan caught his reflection in the mirror. He sighed and lifted his shirt again, pressing his fingers against his ribs. Nothing hurt. Nothing looked different. "Bailey, you're acting crazy," he mumbled, shaking his head. Bailey, sitting nearby, let out a small whimper. His big brown eyes were full of worry. Ethan knelt beside him. "What's wrong, buddy?" He scratched Bailey's ears, but the dog didn't wag his tail like usual. Instead, he nudged Ethan's side again, letting out another soft whine. Ethan frowned. This wasn't normal. At work, he found it hard to concentrate. He kept replaying Bailey's actions in his head. Was he overthinking? Dogs did weird things all the time, didn't they? But something about Bailey's persistence made him uneasy. That evening, Ethan met his best friend, Sarah, for coffee. She had been his friend since college and was now studying to be a veterinarian. If anyone could explain Bailey's behavior, it was her. "So let me get this straight," Sarah said, stirring her tea. "Bailey has been sniffing the same spot on your body for weeks." Ethan nodded. "Yeah. And it's not just sniffing anymore. He paws at me, whines, even barks sometimes. It's like he's trying to tell me something." Sarah's expression changed. She put her cup down and leaned in. "Ethan, this might sound crazy, but have you heard of dogs detecting illnesses?" Ethan blinked. "Wait. What?" "There have been cases where dogs sniff out cancer, infections, even diabetes. They can smell tiny changes in a person's body, things we don't even notice." Ethan stared at her, his stomach tightening. "You're joking, right?" "I'm serious," Sarah said. "I read about a woman whose dog kept sniffing a mole on her leg. She got it checked, and it turned out to be skin cancer." Ethan sat back, his mind racing. "But I feel fine. I don't have any symptoms. No pain, no lumps, nothing." Sarah shrugged. "Maybe it's nothing. Or maybe Bailey knows something you don't." Ethan looked down at his coffee, suddenly losing his appetite. Sarah reached across the table and touched his arm. "Look, I'm not saying you have anything serious, but just to be safe, maybe see a doctor." Ethan let out a shaky breath. Was he really going to do this? See a doctor because his dog was acting weird? It sounded ridiculous. But then he thought about Bailey, his loyal, loving best friend. Bailey wasn't a dog who acted strangely for no reason. And the fear in his eyes. That wasn't normal. Ethan sighed. "All right. I'll make an appointment." Sarah smiled. "Good. It'll give you peace of mind." That night, Ethan sat on his couch, staring at his phone. His finger hovered over the number for his doctor's office. "Okay, Bailey," he muttered. "If you're right about this, I'm buying you all the treats in the world." Bailey wagged his tail, but still looked concerned. He climbed onto the couch and rested his head against Ethan's ribs, letting out a deep sigh. Ethan finally pressed call. Something inside him whispered that Bailey might have just saved his life. Ethan sat in the waiting room of the doctor's office, tapping his fingers on his knee. The smell of disinfectant filled the air, and the soft murmur of voices surrounded him. He felt out of place, like he didn't belong there. He was young, healthy, at least that's what he thought. The whole idea of this visit seemed silly. He was only here because of Bailey. A nurse called his name, snapping him out of his thoughts. Taking a deep breath, he stood up and followed her into the examination room. Dr. Patel, a kind-looking man in his 50s, greeted him with a smile. "Ethan, what brings you in today?" Ethan hesitated. He felt embarrassed to say it out loud. "Oh, well, it's going to sound strange." Dr. Patel chuckled. "I've heard it all. Try me." Ethan sighed. "It's my dog. He keeps sniffing and nudging my ribs. Like, obsessively. He won't stop. My friend said dogs can sometimes detect health problems, so I figured I should get checked, just in case." To Ethan's surprise, the doctor didn't laugh. Instead, he nodded thoughtfully. "That's actually not so strange. There have been studies on dogs detecting illnesses. Let's run some tests, just to be safe." Ethan felt a little relief. At least Dr. Patel was taking him seriously. The doctor examined him, pressing gently on different areas of his ribs. "Any pain here?" "No." Dr. Patel frowned slightly. "I don't feel anything unusual, but let's do some scans to be sure." Ethan's heartbeat quickened. Scans. He had expected the doctor to tell him he was fine and send him home. An hour later, he found himself lying inside a machine, listening to the soft hum of the scanner. His mind raced. Was this all just a waste of time? Or was Bailey really onto something? When the scan was done, Ethan sat in the office, waiting for the results. His fingers drummed against the armrest of the chair. He had never felt this nervous before. Dr. Patel walked in, holding a folder. His face was calm, but there was something in his eyes that made Ethan's stomach drop. "Ethan," he said gently, "we found something." Ethan's breath caught in his throat. "What do you mean?" Dr. Patel set the folder down and looked at him carefully. "There's a small mass near your ribs. It's very early, but we need to do more tests to see if it's serious." Ethan felt like the room was spinning. A mass. That word alone sent a chill down his spine. Dr. Patel's voice was steady. "The good news is that we caught it early. If your dog hadn't alerted you, you probably wouldn't have noticed it for a long time." Ethan swallowed hard. His hands felt cold. "So, Bailey really did know." The doctor nodded. "It seems that way." Ethan let out a shaky breath. He had come here feeling ridiculous, but now he realized something terrifying. Bailey had saved him. As he left the office, Ethan's hands trembled slightly. He reached for his phone and called Sarah. "Hey," he said, his voice uneven. "Ethan, what's wrong?" He swallowed. Bailey was right. They found something. There was silence on the other end before Sarah whispered, "Oh my God." Ethan exhaled. He had no idea what came next, but one thing was clear. His dog had just changed his life forever. Ethan walked out of the doctor's office in a daze. The sun was shining, birds were chirping, and people around him laughed and talked like everything was normal. But for him, nothing felt normal anymore. They found something. The words echoed in his head over and over again. His hands were still shaking as he unlocked his car. He sat in the driver's seat, staring at the steering wheel, trying to process everything. A mass, near his ribs. It could be nothing. It could be something dangerous. More tests were needed. He took a deep breath and picked up his phone. His fingers hovered over Sarah's number before he pressed call. She answered right away. "Ethan, what happened?" He swallowed hard. "They found something." His voice was quieter than he expected. Sarah's gasp was audible. "Oh my God. What did they say?" "They don't know if it's serious yet, but they need to do more tests." He rubbed his temple, feeling the weight of the situation pressing down on him. "Sarah, what if Bailey really saved my life?" There was a pause. Then Sarah said, "He did, Ethan. He absolutely did." Ethan closed his eyes. "I don't even know how to feel right now." "Listen to me," Sarah said firmly. "You're going to get those tests. You're going to stay strong. And no matter what happens, you're not alone." Ethan felt a lump in his throat. "Thanks, Sarah." After ending the call, he started the car and drove home. His mind was spinning, but there was one thing he knew for sure. He needed to see Bailey. Bailey knew first. When Ethan opened the door, Bailey was already there, tail wagging, ears perked up. But as Ethan stepped inside, Bailey's expression changed. His tail slowed, his body tensed, and he sniffed the air like he was searching for answers. Ethan knelt down. "Hey, buddy." His voice was shaky. Bailey licked his face, then nudged Ethan's ribs gently, right on the spot where the doctors had found the mass. Ethan let out a weak laugh. "You knew before I did, huh?" Bailey whined softly and rested his head against Ethan's chest. Ethan wrapped his arms around his dog. "You saved me, Bailey." His voice cracked as he whispered, "I don't even know how to thank you." Bailey didn't need words. He just stayed close, his warm body pressed against Ethan's, as if telling him everything would be okay. Facing the unknown. The next few days passed in a blur. More tests, more waiting, more sleepless nights. Ethan tried to act normal, but deep down, fear was eating away at him. Every time he sat on the couch, Bailey curled up beside him, placing his head near Ethan's ribs. He never left his side, as if he knew Ethan needed him more than ever. Finally, The doctor called with the results. Ethan's heart pounded as he picked up the phone. "Ethan," Dr. Peidel said, "it looks like the mass is small and hasn't spread. That means we caught it early. We need to remove it, but you have a very good chance of full recovery." Ethan let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. His hands were shaking, but this time it wasn't from fear, it was from relief. "We'll schedule surgery right away," the doctor continued. "I want you to know, if you hadn't come in when you did, things could have been much worse." Ethan swallowed hard. He looked down at Bailey, who was sitting at his feet, watching him with those deep brown eyes. "I didn't come in on my own," Ethan said softly. "My dog made me." Dr. Patel chuckled. "Then you owe him your life." Ethan smiled, running a hand through Bailey's fur. "Yeah, I really do." The day of the surgery arrived faster than Ethan expected. The hospital smelled like antiseptic, and the bright lights made everything feel too real. He sat on the hospital bed in a thin gown, staring at the ceiling while nurses moved around him, preparing for the procedure. His chest felt tight, not from pain, but from nerves. Sarah sat beside him, giving him a reassuring smile. "You're going to be fine," she said, squeezing his hand. Ethan forced a small smile. "I know." But deep down, fear still clung to him. Then he thought of Bailey. His best friend, his protector, the reason he was here before it was too late. Bailey had been right all along. Ethan had always taken care of his dog, but now Bailey had taken care of him. A nurse walked in with a clipboard. "Are you ready, Mr. Carter?" Ethan took a deep breath. He thought of Bailey waiting for him at home, his tail wagging, his big brown eyes full of love. For Bailey, for himself, he had to do this. He nodded. "Yeah, I'm ready." The longest wait. Sarah stayed at the hospital during the surgery, pacing the waiting room. She had called Ethan's parents and kept checking her phone, even though there were no updates yet. Meanwhile, at home, Bailey sat by the front door, his ears perked up. He hadn't touched his food. Every few minutes, he would walk to Ethan's favorite chair, sniffing it, then let out a quiet whine. Sarah had stopped by the house earlier to check on him, but Bailey wouldn't play or eat. He just waited. He knew Ethan was missing. Waking up, Ethan's eyelids felt heavy as he woke up to the sound of beeping monitors. His throat was dry, and his body felt sore. But when he blinked his eyes open, the first thing he saw was Sarah's relieved face. "You're awake," she said, leaning forward. Ethan let out a small, weak laugh. "Barely." Sarah smiled. "The doctor said everything went well. They removed the mass, and you're going to be okay." Ethan felt a wave of relief wash over him. He was okay. It was over. Then another thought hit him. "Bailey." Sarah chuckled. "He's waiting for you at home. He hasn't moved from the front door since you left." Ethan's heart ached at the thought of his dog waiting for him. "I need to get home soon." Sarah patted his arm. "Rest first. Then we'll get you home to your hero." Reunion. The moment Ethan walked through the front door, Bailey sprang up. His tail wagged wildly as he ran straight to Ethan, whining with excitement. Ethan knelt down despite the soreness in his body and wrapped his arms around Bailey. "Hey, buddy," he whispered. "I told you I'd come back." Bailey licked Ethan's face frantically, his entire body shaking with happiness. Ethan chuckled, rubbing his ears. "You saved my life, Bailey. I don't know how, but you did." Bailey rested his head against Ethan's chest, letting out a deep sigh of relief. Ethan smiled softly. "I promise, I'll never ignore you again." Bailey wagged his tail, as if he already knew Ethan would keep that promise. Ethan sat on the couch, resting with Bailey curled up beside him. The soft rise and fall of Bailey's breath was comforting. It had been 3 days since his surgery, and although his body felt sore, his heart felt lighter than it had in weeks. He was going to be okay. He reached down, running his fingers through Bailey's soft fur. "I owe you everything, buddy." Bailey lifted his head and licked Ethan's hand. His eyes were full of love, as if to say, "I was just doing my job." Ethan smiled. "I don't know how you knew something was wrong, but I'm glad you did." Sarah had come by earlier, bringing groceries and making sure Ethan was comfortable. "Take it easy," she had warned him. "And listen to Bailey. He seems to know what's best for you." Ethan chuckled at the memory. Yeah, Bailey definitely knows best. A different kind of walk. A few days later, Ethan felt strong enough to go outside. He clipped Bailey's leash on and stepped onto the sidewalk. The fresh air felt good, and Bailey trotted beside him happily, glancing up every now and then, as if checking on him. They walked slowly past the familiar trees and houses, past the park where they used to run together. Everything felt the same, yet different. Ethan had always loved these walks, but now they felt more meaningful. Every step reminded him that he had been given a second chance. At the corner of the street, an elderly woman with a small poodle smiled at him. "It's good to see you out again, Ethan." He blinked in surprise. "You noticed I was gone?" She chuckled. "Of course. You and Bailey walk past here every day. I wondered where you'd been." Ethan smiled. "Had some health stuff, but I'm okay now, thanks to this guy." He patted Bailey's head. The woman's eyes softened. Dogs have a way of knowing, don't they? Ethan nodded. "Yeah, they really do." Spreading the word. That night, Ethan sat on his laptop, typing a post for social media. "A few weeks ago, my dog, Bailey, started acting strange. He kept sniffing the same spot on my ribs, whining and nudging me. At first, I ignored it, but he didn't stop. Thanks to him, I went to the doctor and found out I had a small mass near my ribs. I had no symptoms, no pain, nothing. If Bailey hadn't warned me, I wouldn't have known until it was too late. My dog saved my life." Never ignore your pets when they try to tell you something. They might just be your guardian angel. He attached a picture of Bailey sitting proudly beside him. As soon as he posted it, the comments poured in. "Wow, this gave me chills. Dogs are truly amazing. I'm so glad you listened to Bailey. He's a hero." Ethan smiled. If sharing his story helped even one person pay attention to their pet's warnings, it was worth it. Bailey, lying beside him, let out a happy sigh. Ethan reached over and scratched behind his ears. "You're famous now, buddy." Bailey wagged his tail, completely content. And for the first time in a long time, Ethan felt truly at peace. Ethan woke up to the sound of his phone buzzing. Blinking away sleep, he reached for it on the nightstand. The bright screen showed dozens of notifications, likes, comments, and shares from his post about Bailey. He sat up slowly, careful not to move too fast. His body was still healing, but he felt stronger each day. Bailey curled up at the foot of the bed, stretched and wagged his tail the moment Ethan made a sound. "Morning, buddy," Ethan said, scratching Bailey's head. "Guess what? You're famous." Bailey licked Ethan's hand, completely unaware of how much the world was talking about him. Ethan scrolled through the comments. "This story made me cry. Dogs are truly angels. I checked myself after reading this. My dog had been acting weird too. I'm going to the doctor just in case. Bailey is a real-life hero." Ethan couldn't believe it. His story wasn't just touching hearts. It was making people pay attention to their own pets. Maybe, just maybe, Bailey would save more lives than just his. An unexpected call. Later that afternoon, Ethan's phone rang with an unknown number. He hesitated before answering. "Hello. Hi, is this Ethan Carter?" a woman's voice asked. "Yes. Who's this?" "My name is Lisa Miller. I work for a local news station. We saw your story about Bailey and were wondering if we could do a segment on it. Would you be open to an interview?" Ethan's eyes widened. The news. This was bigger than he expected. Yeah, he said, glancing at Bailey, who was chewing on a toy. "I'd love to." "Great. We'd love to meet Bailey too. We can come by your house tomorrow if that works. Ethan smiled. Sounds perfect. Lights, camera, action. The next day, a news crew arrived at Ethan's home. Bailey was excited to meet the new visitors, wagging his tail and sniffing their equipment. The reporter, Lisa, knelt down and gave him a few head scratches. He's even cuter in person, she laughed. Ethan chuckled. Yeah, but don't let that face fool you. He's smarter than he looks. The interview started, and Ethan told his story, from Bailey's strange behavior to the doctor's visit, the surgery, and how Bailey had saved his life. Lisa nodded. It's incredible how dogs can sense things we can't. Ethan glanced at Bailey. Yeah, I never really thought about it before, but now, I'll never ignore him again. Lisa smiled. And what would you say to others who might be in your situation? Ethan looked into the camera. Listen to your pets. They know us better than we think. The interview ended, and the crew packed up. Before leaving, Lisa shook Ethan's hand. Thank you for sharing this. I have a feeling Bailey's story will help a lot of people. Ethan watched them drive away, then turned to Bailey. Well, buddy, you're a TV star now. Bailey wagged his tail and flopped onto the couch like he didn't have a care in the world. Ethan laughed. You really don't care about any of this, do you? Bailey let out a happy sigh. All he cared about was being by Ethan's side. And for Ethan, that was more than enough. The night after the news story aired, Ethan sat on the couch with Bailey curled up beside him. His phone kept buzzing. Texts from friends, messages from strangers, and notifications from social media. People from all over the country had seen Bailey's story. Some shared their own experiences about pets acting strangely before an illness was discovered. Others thanked Ethan for reminding them to pay attention to their furry companions. Ethan scrolled through the messages, smiling. He had never expected Bailey's actions to inspire so many people. You're not just my hero, buddy, Ethan said, rubbing Bailey's ears. You're a hero to a lot of people now. Bailey wagged his tail and licked Ethan's hand, as if saying, I was just doing what I was meant to do. A special visitor. A few days later, Ethan received an unexpected email from the local animal shelter. Hi Ethan, we saw your story about Bailey and were incredibly moved. We work with many rescue dogs, and your story proves how special they truly are. If you're interested, we'd love to invite you and Bailey to visit our shelter and meet some of our adoptable dogs. We think your story could help bring awareness to rescue pets and their amazing abilities. Let us know. Ethan's heart warmed as he read the message. He had always loved dogs, but now he understood them in a way he never had before. The next weekend, he and Bailey visited the shelter. The moment they walked in, tails wagged. Excited barks filled the air, and curious noses sniffed the newcomers. Ethan greeted the shelter workers, and they introduced him to a few special dogs. Many of these dogs have been through tough times, one worker said, but they still have so much love to give. Ethan knelt to pet a shy golden retriever mix. Hey there, buddy, he said softly. The dog hesitated, then slowly licked Ethan's hand. Bailey stood beside him, tail wagging. It was almost as if he understood that these dogs needed love too. Ethan looked at the shelter worker. I want to help, he said, even if it's just sharing stories or encouraging people to adopt. She smiled. That would mean the world to these dogs. The beginning of something new. Weeks passed, and Ethan fully recovered from his surgery. Life felt normal again. But in many ways, it wasn't the same. Bailey's story had changed him. He started volunteering at the shelter, helping dogs find loving homes. He shared their stories online, just like he had shared his own. People listened. More dogs got adopted. One evening, as he sat on the porch with Bailey, he thought about how much had happened in just a few months. I never would have guessed that one moment, one sniff, would change my whole life, Ethan said. Bailey, lying beside him, thumped his tail against the wood. Ethan smiled. But I guess that's what best friends do. They look out for each other. Bailey let out a content sigh, resting his head on Ethan's lap. Ethan ran his fingers through Bailey's fur, feeling an overwhelming sense of gratitude. Life had given him a second chance, and he owed it all to the dog who had never stopped loving him. And from that day forward, Ethan made a promise, not just to Bailey, but to himself. To listen, to appreciate, to never take a moment for granted. Because sometimes the greatest miracles come in the form of 4 paws, a wagging tail, and a nose that knows best.